We're joined now by the National E-Hailing Federation of South Africa. The head of the presidency of that organization is Vhatuka Mbelengwa. And we are also joined via the virtual platform by the South African National Taxi Council's Mandla Hermanus. Mr. Hermanus, good evening to you as well. All right, let me start in studio here. Mr. Mbelengwa, firstly, condolences on the loss of an e-hailing driver. The understanding is that he may not necessarily have belonged to an organization yet within the e-hailing industry because he was new in Gauteng, only here for 2 weeks. Do you know what happened?
We are not fully clear on what happened, but what we can be certain on is that it was unnecessary. It was an avoidable death. We're not even sure what the motivation was. It's something that remains unjustifiable and rather nonsensical. And as NEFSA, we are just taking the position to completely speak against it. We're saying that government should lead in. We need decisive leadership in this moment. We can't hesitate in this moment, because what we are finding and what we can really consider to be the situation in Soweto at this moment is that it is a collapse. You know, when a society, when a community decides on its own that it's going to shut down a mall, there is an absence in leadership within the community. There is an absence in leadership within governance. And you're leaving society to its own devices. And this can be extended onto the senseless attacks that we are seeing within industry, because there is an absence of controls within transportation.
The taxi industry, before I go to Mr. Hermanus, the taxi industry appears to say that they also in the dark about why this gentleman who is identified as Mr. Mvelase would have been attacked. If that's the case, why is the community angry at or towards the taxi industry?
I think for a decade we've been addressing the symptoms and not the source. And it's easy, and the general narrative is that there's underlying tensions, or there are tensions that exist between your minibus taxi operator and your e-hailing operator. And this is a critical misdiagnosis of this problem. It is not the problem. The problem is that you've got an e-hailing industry that emerged, and government has admitted that it was caught napping upon its emergence. And you are finding an influx of vehicles that are not getting enough work. You know, the amount of vehicles being made available in the different economic hubs within the different cities across the country cannot justify the amount of resources available for public transportation. And therefore, it's becoming competitive in an unhealthy way. Now, there's also a great element of criminality where people are robbing each other, where there's been other arson cases in the past which were not motivated by or blamed on the traditional minibus industry. So there are many motivations or many unknown motivations, therefore, within the space.
Yeah.
I think it's reckless for us to just simply put the blame on them and not put the blame on government, who is essentially the custodian of industries.
Okay. Mr. Hermanus, let's bring you into the conversation now. And the taxi industry, as Mr. Mbelengwa is saying here, that there has been this underlying tension. However, there is no certainty as we sit here today whether the people responsible for what happened outside Maponya Mall in Soweto last night was as a direct result of the taxi industry attacking the e-hailing drivers. What's your reaction first to what happened there?
It's very sad and it's unfortunate, and may his soul rest in peace. And we have to be very clear, irrespective of whether there could have been simmering tensions, whether it's amongst e-hailing operators or between e-hailing operators and the minibus taxi industry, there is no reason for anyone to be killed as a result of any tension that might be. We have to sit down and resolve issues around the table. And Santaco has incorporated e-hailing and metered taxis as part of the Santaco structure. And I was listening to the MEC. It seems there had been meetings and agreements as recent as 3 weeks back. So that's why this killing now has caught everyone by surprise, because we do not understand if there had been engagements between the minibus taxi industry and the e-hailing guys around that area.
Yeah.
Why then would suddenly someone just get killed brutally so, today? So we condemn it in the strongest possible term. But one of the challenges that we have is that because these are not isolated incidents, these things have been happening in the past, but the biggest challenge is that when no one is arrested, then you don't get to the core as to why a person decides to kill another human being, whether it's within the minibus taxi industry or in the e-hailing space. So the lack of arrests and the charging of people criminally creates an impression that you can act with impunity when it relates to metered and e-hailing taxis or minibus taxis.
You're absolutely right, Mr. Hermanus. Your diagnosis here is spot on. As we speak, there is a visual that was taken by the colleagues here at Newzroom Afrika of a taxi that is burning, and the understanding is that it was not too far from Maponya Mall. It would have been in the Pimville section of Soweto. It's a minibus taxi that is burning. And so there is a direct anger that is that's directed towards the taxi industry. What is your message tonight, particularly towards the taxi owner who may feel that his taxi was targeted unfairly? What is your overall message to the taxi industry?
To everyone, I think this calls for calm and cool heads. And we have to convene the province of Gauteng, the taxi organizations there, as well as leaders in the e-hailing space in that province, have to get together. The message has to be uniform between all of us to say, whatever happens, if a taxi has been burnt down, let us not immediately assume that the e-hailing guys are responsible. As much as we understand that, because there's always this assumption that if something happens to an e-hailing operator, then it must be the minibus taxi guys responsible. Let's not say because a taxi was burnt, then we hold the e-hailing guys responsible. It could have been the community members acting on misinformation and the wrong assumption that when something like this happens, then the minibus taxis are to blame. So we have to come out very strongly and say what has happened has already happened. Unfortunately, we cannot undo it. And even worse, the life that has been lost can not come back. Whereas an asset, you can work hard and buy your taxi again, but the person who has died, that person is lost forever. So we must make sure as leaders in communities within the taxi industry, e-hailing and metered taxis, let's speak with one voice to say we need to do everything in our power to bring an end to the violence, sit around the table, find agreements, and develop the working relationship between e-hailing metered taxis and minibus taxis.
Mr. Mbelengwa, those are very encouraging words of unity from an organization that represents the minibus taxi industry as a whole in South Africa. What is your message to the community of Soweto who have visibly directed their anger towards the minibus taxi?
Look, I echo the sentiments of my co-guest. We've had a fantastic, engaging opportunity with Santaco over the years. And we can confirm many of these sort of aspersions within society about the so-called stubborn men in the taxis are not true. These people are ready to engage. These people are not about violence. These people are ready to lead us. These people are ready to form one community with us. I think it's important we unite because a decade later, we can't keep speaking of each other as though we're not participating within the same industry. It's not us or them. We need to become one unity and really do speak in one voice. But I do need to highlight the fact that there is an absence of ethical leadership from dominant app companies, which is Uber and Bolt. It is their technology and the manner in which they are deploying it that is considered to be irresponsible and not considerate of the societal impact it has. And we are speaking in and amongst ourselves, although those organizations are deploying their own business strategy with no due consideration for the ongoing loss of life. I know the situation seems bad, but truly, truly, we are only now on the precipice of absolute catastrophe. And should we not have effective leadership, if we are not going to have a government that's going to be a custodian of its people, a custodian of its industry, we are only about to see trouble truly begin.
Yeah.
It's been far too long that the minibus industry is being undermined and other segments within transportation by an ever-growing, uncontrolled e-hailing industry.
Very quickly, what is it that government is failing to do here in regulating the e-hailing industry?
Government, firstly, is just failing to commit to regulating. And once they can commit to a proper regulatory regime, we can create an ecosystem. And you know what? We are even at the point of now saying we are ready to guide that process, because every politician that is then appointed comes through and they must still learn this industry. And we are evolving with it, and we are understanding it and engaging it on a global perspective. We're speaking on platforms all over the continent. And every time we've got MECs and MMCs that catch up because they got to play politics. Transport's not an industry for politics anymore. You got to give us real leadership. You got to give us visionary leadership and people who are going to stay for the long haul.
Vhatuka, I want to end it there with you. Mr. Hermanus, your last words. I mean, there is a very clear message that's directed towards government here tonight in studio. What would your message be? Because you sit at the national level of the taxi industry, and that means you have access to Minister Barbara Creecy. So what is it that you are going to say to her about the regulation of the e-hailing service?
The NLTA was amended, and I believe the regulations were promulgated, and they need to be gazetted. And then we must really see the regulation of the e-hailing space to prevent the influx, which will lead to unhealthy competition. Like the fact that now the person who was killed, even the e-hailing guys are saying, no, he was new, he has just arrived. And it should not be so simple to just buy a vehicle, subscribe to the app and start operating with no operating licenses. So government has to really come on board. I mean, the e-hailers have been around for over a decade now. Why is it up to this point there's still no regulation that guides their operations?
Mandla, Hermanus from Santaco, thank you very much for your words, and very, very important words of unity spoken here tonight. And in studio here, Vhatuka Mbelengwa is from the National E-Hailing Federation of South Africa. Thank you very much for your contributions.